By the time the church bell marked 4, Victoria Murphy could no longer feel the first 2 fingers of her left hand, though she kept them locked around the handle of the ledger basket, as if warmth might return by obedience alone. Sleet came slantwise across the coaching road. It struck her cheeks like thrown grit. The dark was not complete, yet not morning either, and the lane held that iron-grey light that made every hedge look like wire. Her shoes had split at the seams 3 miles back. Cold water and thawed mud worked through the stockings and into skin already rubbed raw. Each step pressed wet wool against the broken place at her heel. The cut reopened and closed in the rhythm of her limp. She had wrapped the basket in a square of old linen to keep the debt papers dry, then lost that cloth to wind in the first field beyond Bracken House. Now the corners of the top ledger dug through wicker and against her chest each time she stumbled. She shifted it higher and felt another seam tear beneath her sleeve. She tasted metal at the back of her throat from the cold. Breathing hurt. Holding breath hurt more. She kept moving because stillness in that weather was a bargain with the grave, and because Lady Bracken had stood in the back passage with a silver bell in one hand and said, in the tone used for broken crockery, "Deliver these to Mr. Pell in Mariston and return before nightfall. Fail, and your attic room is required for guests." Victoria had curtsied with chapped knuckles and answered, "Yes, Lady Bracken," though she knew she had already failed by being born to the wrong woman and surviving the right man. A wagon passed her at first light without slowing. The carter looked once, then past her, as if she were a marker stone and not a person. She stepped off the road to give his wheel room, sank to the ankle in frozen ruts, and pulled free by bracing one hand against the hedge thorns. The thorn caught skin below her thumb. A thin line of blood slid toward her wrist before the sleet washed it away. Under the eaves of a wayside inn, 2 gentlemen in travelling cloaks stood with their gloved hands around warm cups, while a stable lad swept old straw into a pile. Victoria crossed in front of them because the road narrowed there, her basket balanced against her ribs, her skirts heavy with weather. One gentleman lowered his cup. "Is she servant or beggar?" he asked, in a voice meant to be private and failing. The other laughed softly. "Plain enough for either." Neither moved, neither offered cover beneath the eaves. She felt their gaze on her torn cuff and on the edge of stocking where blood had warmed through wool near her ankle. Shame rose in her like sudden fever, then settled into its older shape, the one she carried each day like another pail to be lifted. She had no spare strength for pride in public. Pride was for secret hours. She passed them, eyes on the stable-yard gate, and counted her steps from post to post, because numbers were clean and numbers did not mock. 9 to the trough, 12 to the gate, 7 to the lantern hook. Her stomach clenched so sharply she had to pause with one shoulder against the wall. She had eaten bread, heel, and weak tea at noon the previous day, and had been given nothing after, not at supper, and not before dawn departure. Hunger made her hands tremble. Cold made the tremor constant. The basket held 3 years of copied rents, 2 account books with loosened spines, and a sealed packet tied in blue ribbon that Lady Bracken had forbidden her to open. Victoria knew the ledgers by weight. She knew the scrape of certain pages where numbers had been altered and scraped again. She knew where ink changed shade in a column halfway down, where a careful clerk's hand gave way to hasty loops that did not balance and would never balance. These things sat in her mind as clearly as parish boundaries. Her father had taught her to check the sum at the foot of each page before she trusted the line above it. He had taught her with patience and with jam stains on his cuffs, laughing when she frowned too hard at borrowed coins. "Figures are honest if people are not," he had said on summer evenings at the long table in what had been his library. The room was now Lady Bracken's morning salon, all pale silk chairs and perfume, while her daughters practised music where law books once stood. After her father died under the weight of another man's failed shipping loan, and after her mother followed him before the next thaw, the estate changed hands without changing deed. Lady Bracken married into the house and sold shelves first, then horses, then 2 fields near the river. Old servants were dismissed for imagined insolence. Mrs. Doyle from the kitchens went to a sister in Bath. Mr. Finch, who had served her father 28 years, was told his cough offended guests. Victoria's books were boxed and sold by yard measure. She found one, weeks later, wrapping fish in the village market. She bought it back with mending money and hid it beneath attic boards. Since then she had copied figures at night by candle end, page by page, from the 2 account manuals she had rescued, her breath held each time floorboards sounded on the stairs. It was a private craft and a private defiance. No one praised it. No one knew. Yet, when she walked now through sleet with ledgers pressed to her ribs, she carried not only Lady Bracken's command, but the quiet certainty that someone in that house understood the theft in full, line for line, and that someone was her. By the 2nd week of January, the road to Mariston had become a corridor of frozen mud, bounded by thorn hedges and black trees, stripped bare to bone. Victoria had walked it in rain, in fog, once in hard sun that made the chalk dust white as flour, but never in this cutting weather with wind from the north fields and snow beginning beneath the sleet. Her cloak had been taken for alteration and never returned. Lady Bracken said it did not suit her colouring. She wore a shawl too thin for autumn, much less winter, and one dress of brown wool mended at both elbows and twice at the hem. The mending thread cut a darker line where wet cloth clung to her shins. Her fingers were red and split at the knuckles from laundering silk gowns in water that turned to needles by the end of each basin. She had scrubbed cuffs before dawn until her nails bent back from skin, then carried ash to the scullery, then packed these ledgers under the housemaid's eye and left by the side gate without breakfast. It was labour no caller would ever see. In the drawing-room, Lady Bracken told visitors, with that mild smile she reserved for cruelty, that Miss Murphy had no taste for society and little talent for anything useful. The daughters repeated it. They called her solemn, narrow, ungrateful for shelter. They wore velvet slippers by the fire while she wrung soap from lace at the yard pump. Once, in front of guests, Lady Bracken had lifted Victoria's chin and said, "Poor child, she has her father's thinness and none of his charm." Laughter had followed. Victoria learned then to keep her face still. Tears gave them spectacle. Silence gave them less. She reached the posting inn stable yard as dawn finally thinned the dark. Lantern lights swung from a hook near the tack room and painted the snow in amber patches between prints of hoof and boot. The wind drove through the open gate and found every wet place on her body at once. Snow had crusted in her dark hair. It clung to her lashes, melting in slow stings at the corner of each eye. She set the basket down on an upturned crate and flexed her hands, wincing as blood moved back into numb skin with sharp pins of pain. Her right stocking had frozen to the cut at her heel. When she shifted her weight, cloth pulled and the wound opened again. Warmth spread briefly, then cooled. No one came to take the papers. No one called her name. A groom led out a bay mare and glanced at her once before looking away, the practised look of a man who had learned that seeing another's hardship could become a debt. From the inn kitchen vent came the smell of onion broth and toasted bread. The scent struck her with such force she gripped the crate edge to steady herself. She could not spend even a farthing from the household purse on food. Lady Bracken counted coins on return. Lady Bracken counted minutes too. Victoria straightened, lifted the basket once more, and crossed toward the office door where moneylenders received petitions and servants waited in passageways for decisions that altered entire lives. Her body shook with cold and hunger. Her back ached from weight and wind. Yet the ledgers were dry. The figures were intact. She raised her hand to knock. But her knuckles hovered a breath above the paint-scarred wood, while the pain in her fingers sharpened from numbness to pins of fire, and in that suspended instant she had the odd, familiar feeling that her life had become a corridor of thresholds, where she was permitted to carry burdens through doors, but never to stand inside for long. The door opened inward without her touch. A clerk in a grey waistcoat looked first at the basket, then at her face, then at the hem of her dress where sleet and road mud had dried in stiff ridges. His expression did not soften. It did not harden either. It settled into the neutral patience reserved for tradesmen and petitioners and women who arrived with papers that did not belong to them. "Business?" he asked. She gave her name and held out the packet with the blue ribbon, because that, Lady Bracken had said, must be delivered unopened and by hand. He took it with 2 fingers, as if the ribbon might stain, then lifted the basket from her arms and grunted at the weight. Warmth spilled from the office behind him in waves that smelled of lamp oil, damp wool, sealing wax, and the bitter edge of ink. It struck her wet skin like a blow. Her knees nearly gave. He noticed only that she had not stepped away from the door. "You will wait in the passage." She obeyed because disobedience was a luxury she had not been afforded since girlhood. The bench against the wall was narrow and polished by years of anxious bodies. She sat without removing her shawl. Meltwater dripped from the hem of her skirt and darkened the floorboards beneath her boots. On the opposite wall hung framed notices of arrears, foreclosure orders, and auction dates, written in clerkly hands so neat they looked almost devout. A bell rang in the front room. A man coughed, pages turned, quills scratched. Money moved in silence and in signatures, while the poor waited in passages and tried not to shiver loud enough to offend. Her stomach drew tight again. She pressed one fist lightly against it and fixed her eyes on the crack in the boards near her boot to keep from looking toward the half-open office door, where a small coal grate burned bright enough to make the brass fender gleam. The line of heat on her face awakened old memory with cruel precision. Her father at the library fire, sleeves rolled, one hand stained with blue-black ink, tapping a column and saying that errors had habits, that lies repeated themselves if one watched with patience, that no debt appeared from air. He had believed figures could be made to serve truth. He had believed men of standing would honour signatures and return favours honestly. He had guaranteed one shipment for a friend with a London name and polished boots. One guarantee became 2. A storm took the first vessel. Piracy took the second, or so the letters claimed. Insurance failed on technical language no one explained to him until it was final. By the time he understood he had been used as a shield for another man's risk, the note holders had already arrived. She still remembered the day they inventoried the silver. Her father stood at the long table with his palm flat over a ledger, as if weight alone could hold the house together. He did not shout. He apologized to her for the noise in the hall. He told her to keep her sums clean and her name cleaner. A winter later, fever found him and finished what shame began. Her mother buried him, with hands that shook only once, at the final prayer. The following spring she coughed blood into linen that she folded and hid from servants. By harvest, she was gone as well, and Victoria learned how quickly condolence cards became account demands when the door closed. Lady Bracken entered the estate soon after, all rosewater and rustle, not as a grieving relation, but as a correction written in expensive silk across every room that had once held memory. She came with 2 daughters, both fair and bright, and practised in smiles that never reached their eyes, and with an instinct for possession so exact it felt like bookkeeping of another sort. She did not rage in the first months. She improved, she rearranged. She said the house had suffered from masculine disorder and feminine sentiment, and required better management. The library became a morning salon in pale green. The globe that had stood beside her father's desk vanished. The atlas shelves emptied. Volumes bound in calfskin were stacked in the corridor and sold by lot to a dealer from York, while Victoria stood with dust on her cuffs and watched years of her father's marginal notes carried out under other men's arms. Her mother's escritoire was moved upstairs for repair and never returned. Portraits shifted as if rank itself could be altered by nail and cord. Her own room on the second floor, the one with the narrow view of the east meadow and the pear tree that bloomed late each spring, was given to the elder stepdaughter because the light suited complexion better. Victoria was placed in the attic beside the cistern, where pipes knocked through the night and frost painted the inside of the pane by dawn. At table, she was moved from daughter's place to the lower end, then from the lower end to a side setting with housemaids on busy nights, then told she might take supper in the scullery to ease crowding when callers came. Food grew conditional. Warmth did too. Her cloak was borrowed, her gloves mislaid, her boots sent to be mended and returned a week late after snow. The language of each theft remained impeccably polite. "You are young, Miss Murphy. You adapt so well." "The girls have social obligations." "Do not stand idle, child. It makes people uneasy." When she failed to anticipate orders, Lady Bracken touched the silver bell, and servants appeared as witnesses to correction. When she succeeded, silence followed, as if labour arrived from nowhere. There were days of hauling coal scuttles up 3 flights because the new maid had weak wrists, nights of laundering lace until her fingertips split and bled into rinse water she hid with more soap, mornings spent unpicking old hems to re-sew gowns for girls who called her solemn and thin, and watched her hands as if ugliness might be contagious. Once, before 6 luncheon guests, Lady Bracken drew her forward by the sleeve and said with a little laugh, "Miss Murphy has no head for accounts, poor thing. Numbers distress her." Laughter moved around the table like cutlery passing hand to hand. Victoria held a tureen steady while heat burned her palms through cloth, and answered, "Yes, Lady Bracken," because truth in that room cost more than she could pay. But shame did not erase memory. At night, after floors were cleared and lamps lowered, she took out 2 surviving manuals her father had taught from, copied exercises by candle nub, and recalculated the estate columns she glimpsed by day. Each page she finished, she slid beneath the loose attic board near the bed leg. Each hidden sheet felt like breath held under water. Debt became the household weather. It entered every corridor and sat at every meal, though no one named it where guests could hear. Horses were sold for efficiency. Tenant repairs were delayed pending review. Coal orders were cut in November, and servants blamed for drafts in December. Yet Lady Bracken ordered imported oranges for 12th night, and the daughters wore new ribbon every fortnight. Bills were paid late when the tradesmen had no influence, and swiftly when delay might produce gossip in drawing rooms that mattered. Victoria understood the pattern before she had proof. She carried trays into the morning room and saw rent tallies with figures overwritten in different ink. She polished the escritoire and found promissory notes folded beneath fashion plates. She delivered sealed packets to riders at the side gate and memorized names she was never meant to hear. Mr. Pell's name appeared most often. So did the bank in Mariston, and once a solicitor in town who had served her father and had stopped calling after Lady Bracken informed him that Miss Murphy was too fragile for business conversation. The truth was simpler. If Victoria remained unlettered in law and excluded from accounts, then signatures could be moved around her like furniture. Her majority had passed in autumn with no acknowledgement beyond another list of chores pinned to the kitchen board. Her legal right to review estate books remained ink on paper no one intended to show her. That was why this journey mattered more than warmth or food. The ledgers in Mr. Pell's office were not only records of rent and arrears. They were the spine of a claim. If numbers disappeared, so did names. If names vanished, land followed. She sat in the passage and listened while voices rose and fell beyond the door, while coin clicked once on wood, while the clerk's shoes crossed back and forth with quick, dry steps of a man who had never carried wet wool for miles. At length the door opened and Mr. Pell himself appeared, narrow-faced, spectacles low on his nose, cuffs immaculate. He looked at her as he might look at a smudged margin note. "Miss Murphy, Lady Bracken's packet is received. The ledgers will be examined." His gaze dipped to her stocking, to the red bloom at the ankle, and returned to her face without comment. "You may inform Lady Bracken that the draft petition will be ready for signature by dawn if all stands in order." The words struck with cold accuracy. Petition, signature, dawn. She felt the old house tilt in her mind, not from wind but from design long laid. "May I have receipt of delivery, sir?" she asked, because her father had taught her never to leave paper without paper. A pause, a faint lift of brow as if surprised that the plain girl spoke the language correctly. Then he turned, wrote 3 lines, sanded the ink, and handed over a narrow slip bearing date, hour, and his seal. She folded it twice and slid it inside the seam at her cuff, the one place Lady Bracken did not search unless she was angry. She stood carefully, every joint stiff from cold. In the outer glass she caught her own reflection, blurred by condensation, dark hair plastered to a pale face, eyes too large from hunger, shawl threadbare, mouth set in a line no one in that house had yet managed to soften into surrender. When she stepped back into the stable yard, the wind cut through her wet dress at once, and the first true snow began to fall, thick and silent, over hoofprints, over cart ruts, over the path she would have to walk home carrying nothing visible in her hands, and everything that could still be saved hidden against her skin. The snow fell thicker with each breath she took. Large wet flakes that blurred the yard lamps and softened the edges of carts, troughs and men until the whole morning looked half erased. Victoria had gone only 3 paces from the office door when an ostler called, "Miss Murphy," and held out a folded note pinched between chapped fingers. Red wax, Lady Bracken's seal. No messenger in sight, only the print of fresh boots near the gate and the quick retreat of wheels on packed snow. Victoria's stomach tightened before she broke the seal. The paper smelled faintly of rosewater and smoke, as if it had been written beside a drawing-room fire she had not been permitted to approach in 2 winters. The hand was Lady Bracken's, narrow and elegant and hard as wire. "You are not to return to Bracken House this evening. Your attic chamber has been reassigned to paying guests. Present yourself at Mr. Pell's office at first light for execution of transfer papers. Any attempt to enter the house without invitation will be treated as trespass." Her eyes moved over the lines once, then again, as if a second reading might reveal an error in date or intention. There was none. The world narrowed to the paper, to the wax ruff beneath her thumb, to the sudden absence of any place that could still be called hers. Wind drove snow beneath her shawl and down her spine. She did not feel it at first. Then she felt all of it at once. Behind her someone shouted at a horse near the lane. A wheel struck the gatepost. Harness rang. She folded the note with careful fingers and slid it into the same cuff seam that held Mr. Pell's receipt. One order to erase her, and one proof she still existed, then turned toward the noise as it broke into the yard. A black gelding came through the gate in a spray of white, flanks lathered, nostrils wide, one rein dragging. The rider, in a military greatcoat, sat too low in the saddle, shoulders broad but listing, hat brim caked with ice. The horse stumbled. Iron struck stone. The rider caught himself once, and then half fell, one boot hitting ground, one knee buckling as he dropped against the animal's neck. No one moved quickly. Men watched, measured risk, looked to rank before aid. Victoria did not wait for rank. She set her empty hands against a post for balance and went straight for the horse's head, speaking low the way old Finch had taught her when frightened mares rolled their eyes white in thunder. "Easy now, easy." The gelding tossed, then stilled enough for her to take the hanging rein and draw it clear of the hoof. Up close she saw the rider's gloves soaked dark from wrist to cuff, where leather had cut deep across the palm. She saw frost clinging to his lashes, breath coming in controlled bursts too shallow for safety, jaw set like stone against pain. He smelled of snow, horse sweat, and the metallic tang of blood. "Sir, you must dismount," she said. His eyes opened fully then, grey as winter water, fixed on her face with a focus so sharp it felt like a hand at her throat. He obeyed as if command came from his own body, not from her, and when his boots met ground, he swayed once. She caught his sleeve before sense could stop her. The wool was frozen hard, beneath it muscle rigid with cold and strain. An inn-servant finally ran forward. Another took the horse. The rider did not thank either of them. He looked only at Victoria and spoke in a voice roughened by wind and authority. "Sit! Show me your hands! You are freezing!" She blinked, not at the command, but at being seen in it. Her hands were bare, knuckles split, skin raw and reddened to the wrist. Her sleeve had torn farther on the road. A bruise, old and yellowing at the edge, marked the inner wrist where Lady Bracken had once gripped too hard in front of guests, and smiled while doing it. She drew the shawl tighter. "I am well, sir." The lie came out neat from long practice. He gave one short shake of his head, impatient as weather. "Liar!" The word was quiet. It landed harder than shouted pity ever had. Snow hissed against the stable roof. Somewhere near the kitchens a pan fell, with a clang, and no one laughed. The rider straightened by force of will, and the yard changed around him as men recognized what Victoria had not yet allowed herself to name. The innkeeper came running from the doorway, face gone pale beneath windburn. He bowed too low, too fast. "My Lord Harrow, forgive us. We did not know—" The rider cut him off with a glance. "Earl of Harrow, Rhys Ashford." The name moved through her memory in fragments carried by gossip and fear. Peninsular dispatches, a dead younger brother, winters spent in silence at Harrow Hall, tenants paid on time and dismissed without appeal if they lied. She had never stood within arm's length of an earl. She had certainly never steadied one by the sleeve with bleeding hands in a stable yard. By full dawn, the blizzard had deepened from weather into siege, and the inn-yard became a white-walled pocket where rank, hunger, and pain were forced into the same narrow shelter, whether they wished it or not. Victoria tried once to edge toward the east lane before the drifts rose higher. Harrow saw her move and spoke without raising his voice. "Stop!" She stopped. Not because his tone was loud, because it carried the simple certainty of a man obeyed too often to repeat himself. He stood under the lantern while an ostler unfastened his greatcoat. Snow slid from the shoulders in heavy sheets. Beneath it he wore dark wool marked at the cuff with blood where the rain had sawn through glove and skin. His face looked carved rather than expressive, all angles and restraint, the mouth thin with pain he refused to display. He held out his injured hand to no one and to everyone, and when the innkeeper reached for it, he withdrew a fraction. His eyes returned to Victoria. "You first," he said. She almost laughed at the absurdity. Earls did not wait on women in torn shoes. Earls did not notice servant girls except to move them from hallways. Yet he watched as if the decision mattered. "My lord, I must return before nightfall." Her voice remained formal. Her pulse did not. "The road is closing." "Then I must walk faster." His mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. Not kindness either. Recognition of defiance, perhaps, filed and set aside for later judgment. "You can barely stand." She lifted her chin. "I have stood all morning." The grey eyes dropped to her hem, the frozen mud, the line of blood at her stocking where the reopened cut had bled through again, then to her sleeve, torn, then to the wrist she had tried to hide. "Your sleeve is torn, your wrist is bruised. You were sent out to fail." The words stripped pretense from the air. She felt heat rise under wind-chilled skin, not from shame alone, but from the shock of hearing truth spoken plain in a yard full of strangers who had spent years not seeing. She reached for her cuff to end it. He moved first, one step only, and took her wrist gently before she could fumble out the papers in the wind. "Inside." "Those papers are not yours." "Neither is this storm." He turned toward the inn door, and the innkeeper jumped ahead to open the way. Victoria followed because refusal in that moment would have been theatre, and she had no strength for theatre. The passage beyond smelled of wet wool, broth, and coal smoke. Heat struck her face and made her eyes sting. She stood just inside the threshold, dripping meltwater onto brick, while Harrow flexed his injured hand once, jaw tightening as the torn skin pulled. An older woman in kitchen apron appeared with linen and a basin. He ignored both until Victoria swayed, caught herself on the wall, and pretended she had only shifted weight. He noticed. Of course he noticed. "Chair," he said. She remained standing. "I will not take your place, my lord." "It is not my chair." The innkeeper spoke too quickly, eager to please power. "Miss, pray sit by the range." Victoria looked from one face to the other and chose the smallest surrender. She sat on the edge of a wooden settle near the kitchen door, keeping her shawl tight, hands folded to hide their shaking. Harrow remained where he was, not near enough to crowd, not far enough to dismiss. Servants moved around him with fearful efficiency. His cravat was loosened, his coat was taken. When the glove came off, the cut across his palm showed deep and ragged from frozen leather and force. He did not flinch while the woman rinsed it. He did not thank her when she bound it. He kept his gaze on Victoria, as if waiting for an answer to a question he had not asked. She gave him none. She watched the fire instead, orange against black iron, and thought of Lady Bracken's letter burning through her cuff like a live coal. No room, no bed, sign at dawn. If she failed to appear, the petition might still proceed with lies in place of her voice. If she appeared alone, Lady Bracken would have witnesses arranged and sympathy rehearsed. She needed documents. She needed time. She needed, most dangerously, an ally whose name could not be laughed out of a drawing-room. The thought arrived uninvited and sat in her chest like a blade she could not swallow or spit out. Harrow broke the silence first. "Why were you on the Mariston Road before dawn?" "Errand work." "For whom?" She hesitated. He saw it. "If you lie to me again, do it better." She met his eyes then, because anger gave her steadier breath than fear. "For Lady Bracken of Bracken House." A flicker crossed his face at the name. Not surprise, assessment. "I know the house." "Many do." "Few speak of it well." The kitchen woman set a cup of broth by Victoria's knee. She did not reach for it. Harrow spoke without looking away. "Drink." "I cannot pay. I did not ask for payment. I do not take alms." "Then call it instruction." The old woman made a small sound in her throat that might have been disapproval of pride or approval of backbone. With her, one could not tell. Victoria lifted the cup at last because her hands had begun to tremble in earnest, and hiding it was now foolish. Heat burned her cracked lips. Salt and onion flooded a body that had forgotten expectation. She took 2 careful swallows and stopped before hunger made her careless. Harrow watched that too. "How long since you ate?" "Yesterday." "When?" "Noon." His gaze moved once to the innkeeper, and orders travelled without further speech. Bread arrived. Then more broth. He turned back to her. "You will remain here until the wind drops." "I cannot." "You will." "My lord, you do not understand." "Then make me." The challenge was plain. So was the opening in it. She set down the cup, reached into her torn cuff, and drew out both folded slips. First Mr. Pell's receipt with date, hour, and seal. Then Lady Bracken's note barring her return and commanding her signature by dawn. She held them out. He took them in his uninjured hand, read both without comment, then read them again more slowly. The room had gone quieter than weather allowed. Even the kitchen door ceased swinging. Snow tapped the window in thick, dull strikes. At length he lifted his eyes. The cold in them had changed shape. It was no softer. It was focused. "You are Victoria Murphy." It was not a question. She nodded once. "Daughter of Edmund Murphy." Again, not a question. "Yes, my lord." He folded the papers with care and returned them to her palm, closing her fingers over them one by one, as if sealing a pact neither had named. His own bandaged hand had begun to stain through at the centre, where fresh blood pressed against linen. He seemed not to feel it. "You will not walk back into that house alone," he said, "nor to Pell." She heard the authority in it and the danger. "I did not ask for rescue." His jaw tightened. Wind struck the shutters hard enough to rattle the latch. "Good," he said. "I do not offer rescue." He took up his greatcoat with his good hand, turned to the innkeeper and gave 3 rapid instructions for fresh horses, chains on wheels, and a private room with a table large enough for ledgers. Then he looked at Victoria once more, the command already decided and already in motion. "You will bring every figure you remember. We ride when the time is ready." "We ride when the team is ready." The words settled over the room like a bar dropped into place. Men moved at once. The innkeeper hurried for the yard. The kitchen woman swept breadcrumbs from the table and set down a clean board, as if rank itself had entered the grain. Victoria remained seated 1 heartbeat longer, papers in her closed fist, then stood because stillness had become dangerous in a new way. She had been ordered all her life. This order carried no contempt. That made it harder to meet. "My lord," she said, keeping her voice even, "if we are to stop a transfer by dawn, I require ink, loose paper, and a quiet surface." Harrow's gaze held hers. Snow rattled against the shutters in a hard burst, then fell back to a muffled hiss. "You shall have them." He turned to the kitchen door. "Table, lamp, no interruptions." The old woman gave a short nod that was nearly a bow, and not at all servile. "Aye, my lord," Victoria added, "and I need the stable accounts from last quarter if any were lodged here by carriers." The innkeeper, halfway down the passage, stopped and looked stricken. "Miss, I do not keep estate books." "Then I will work from memory." Harrow did not ask if that was possible. He did not ask if she exaggerated. He said only, "Do it." She followed the kitchen woman into a back room off the range where heat pressed close and copper pans reflected firelight in dull red moons. A narrow table stood beneath a small window now glazed with blown snow. The woman set a lamp near her elbow, a chipped inkwell, 3 goose quills, and a stack of paper cut for household lists. "Best I can do in a storm," she muttered. "It is more than enough," Victoria said. Her fingers still shook. She flattened both palms on the table until the tremor lessened. Then she began, column by column, tenant names first, in the order Lady Bracken's clerk preferred, North Meadow leases, mill cottages, river strip holdings, then winter arrears. She wrote the figures she had seen while carrying tea trays and polishing brass edges where books had been left open in arrogance. She wrote the altered numbers in a second column. She left space for the true sums and waited while memory arranged itself into sequence. Numbers rose in her mind with the old clarity, clean as frost lines on glass. She heard her father's voice in the cadence of addition. Check the foot, check the carry, check what changed after harvest. Behind her, the kitchen laboured through weather and rank with the same blunt rhythm. Pans struck hooks, a ladle scraped iron. Men stomped slush from boots and spoke in lowered tones when Harrow passed the doorway. No one addressed her. For a brief stretch she inhabited the narrow, fierce peace of work done exactly right. The peace broke when a boy cried out near the back steps. It was not loud, it was sharp and quickly swallowed, the sound of someone punished often for making noise. Victoria looked up. Through the half-open door she saw a stable boy no older than 14 on a stool beside the ash bin, one trouser leg rolled to the knee, stocking dark at the shin where a hoof edge or iron buckle had struck him. He held his jaw tight and tried to bind the leg with a filthy strip torn from feed sacking. His hands were black with tack grease. They shook harder than hers. A groom snapped at him from the passage. "Get up, Ned! His lordship's team goes in minutes!" The boy tried to stand. His foot failed beneath him. He caught the wall and nearly fell into the coal scuttle. Victoria set down her quill and crossed the kitchen before anyone could object. "Sit!" she said, and the command came out with a force that surprised even her. She knelt on cold stone and reached for the strip in his hands. It stank of old oil and horse sweat. "This will poison the cart." "It is nothing, miss," he whispered. His lips had gone pale. "If I do not harness, Mr. Cole will turn me out." "Then Mr. Cole can harness with one arm less than usual and discover humility." The words drew a few startled looks. She ignored them. The boy's shin was swelling fast above the boot line. Skin unbroken, thank God, but bruised hard and likely split beneath the surface. He needed compression and heat, then rest he would not be given unless someone with weight spoke. She reached for her shawl. It was the only thing on her body that had fully dried by the range. She had wrapped it around her shoulders a moment before to keep her teeth from chattering over the page. Now she folded it lengthwise, slid it under the boy's calf, and wound it firm around shin and knee, knotting the end above the swelling with fingers that moved from habit born of mending and makeshift survival. Warm wool disappeared from her skin. Cold rushed in at once through her dress sleeves and collar. The boy stared at her, stunned. "Miss, that is yours." "It is ours for the next hour," she said. "Do not put weight on this leg until the swelling settles. Keep it raised." "Mister!" Cole, red-faced and broad, appeared in the doorway with a harness chain over one shoulder. "What is this delay?" Victoria stood slowly so her own dizziness did not show. "He cannot take the traces." "Oh, he can and he will." "No." The single word left her mouth before caution could soften it. The room went still enough for the fire to be heard in the grate. She felt the old instinct to apologize rise and choke, then recede. She did not lower her eyes. Mr. Cole drew breath to answer, but another voice reached them first from the passage behind him. "He will not." Harrow stepped into the kitchen, snow melting from his boots in dark crescents on the flags. He had his greatcoat on again, collar high, bandaged hand held close to his side. He looked from the boy's bound leg to the shawl knot, then to Victoria's bare shoulders beneath the thin brown wool of her dress. The pause was brief. The recognition in it was not. "To whom does the boy belong?" he asked. "Mr." Cole swallowed. "To the inn, my lord." "Then the inn can survive 1 hour without crippling him for life." Harrow's tone did not rise. "You will assign another hand to my team." "Yes, my lord. And fetch hot bricks, wrapped, too." Mr. Cole moved at once. Harrow crouched before the boy, his face hard and unreadable at this distance, then touched 2 fingers to the edge of the improvised bandage as if testing its set. "Who tied this?" Ned pointed with a shaking hand. "Miss Murphy, my lord." Harrow stood. "It is correctly done." He said it to the room, not to her, and the words landed with an odd force, as if some quiet verdict had been issued where mockery usually lived. Victoria turned back to the table before anyone could see what that simple approval did to her breath. She wrote faster. True rent against declared rent. Repairs billed and never made. Coal allotments halved on paper but charged at full order. She marked 3 entries where ink shade changed mid-line and flagged each as probable substitution by a second hand. She built the pattern until it could not be mistaken for error. By the time the first page was complete, her fingers had gone stiff again. She flexed them over the lamp chimney and kept going. When memory faltered on one number, she set the quill down and reconstructed the entire month from adjacent sums, carriage tolls, and grain weights she had overheard in the yard. The missing figure resolved itself in less than a minute. She wrote it cleanly and checked the foot twice. An hour after the church bell should have marked 8, though no bell reached them through storm, Harrow's steward arrived from the yard carrying a wet leather portfolio and wind on his coat. He was lean, middle-aged, with a face composed into the polite severity of men who have spent years keeping other men's chaos from becoming public. He stopped when he saw Victoria at the table. "My lord," he said quietly, "the chains are fixed. We can force the lower road if drifts have not taken the bridge." Harrow inclined his head. "Mr. Vale, this is Miss Murphy." Vale bowed to her with correct form and no warmth wasted. "Miss," Harrow gestured toward the pages, "read." Vale did, quickly at first, then more slowly. His brows narrowed over the second sheet. On the third he drew out the nearest chair and sat without asking, scanning each notation, each paired sum, each line where Victoria had marked the overscrape. At the end he placed both hands flat on the paper and looked up at her. "You prepared these from memory?" "Yes." "Without source books before you?" "Yes, sir." He turned to Harrow. "If even half is accurate, Lady Bracken's petition is structured on diversion and false arrears." "Half is accurate," Victoria said before fear could stop her. "All of it is." Vale's gaze returned to her, keen now rather than dismissive. "Can you swear to that before a magistrate?" "I can swear to what I saw and copied. I can also produce my copied pages if Bracken House has not yet destroyed them." Harrow spoke. "Where?" "In the attic room. beneath the third floorboard from the bed leg nearest the eave wall. Vale reached for his portfolio. "I will send—" "No," Victoria said. "Lady Bracken has eyes in every corridor. If a stranger goes in first, the board will be empty before he reaches the stairs." Harrow's jaw tightened a fraction, the scar at his temple drawing white. "Then we take it ourselves." Vale nodded once, already recalculating route, risk and authority in his silence. From the ash-bin corner came a soft clink. Ned, now with 2 wrapped bricks at his leg and colour returning to his face, had shifted and dropped a horseshoe nail from his pocket. He flinched, as if expecting rebuke. Victoria crossed, picked up the nail and set it on the table beside him. "You keep this," she said, "for luck on apprenticeship day." He blinked. "Apprenticeship!" "If you can read numbers this quickly." She tapped the scratched tally he had made unconsciously in ash beside his stool. "You ought to be in a farrier's books, not breaking yourself for men too impatient to count." The boy looked at her as if she had spoken another language. "I can read some. My mother taught letters." "Then keep learning." Harrow had come to stand in the doorway behind her, without sound. She sensed him there by the sudden attention of others more than by any movement. His eyes went from the ash marks to the boy, then settled on Victoria's face with a scrutiny that felt nothing like society's habit of appraisal. This was observation stripped to function. It unsettled her more. "You know the cost of apprenticeship papers?" he asked. "Yes, my lord," she said. "More than this inn pays him in 6 years." He nodded once, as if confirming a figure in his own head. Noted. No promise, no display. Yet something in Mr. Vale's expression shifted, a tiny acknowledgement of an instruction understood. The storm struck the house again in a long, low shove. Shutters rattled. Somewhere in the front room a child began to cough, thin and persistent, and his mother hushed him with the exhausted rhythm of the poor. Victoria looked toward the sound before she could stop herself. The cough deepened. She set down her quill and went to the shelf where dried thyme hung beside onions. "You are not physician," Vale said not unkindly. "No," she answered, crushing thyme between her fingers over a cup, "but steam and herb will ease his chest for the road." She crossed to the mother, showed her how to hold the cup near the child's mouth without scalding, and waited until the coughing eased from panic to irritation. The woman whispered thanks into the rim. Victoria shook her head and returned to the table, colder now than before, shoulders bare, hands stained with ink and thyme. When she sat, Harrow moved to the peg by the door, took down his own spare wool scarf from beneath his coat collar, and set it on the back of her chair. He did not drape it over her. He did not touch her. "Wear it," he said. "It is yours." "It is an order." She almost refused on instinct. Then she saw the wet beginning to creep through the front of her dress where snowmelt had not fully dried, and she remembered the miles ahead. She wrapped the scarf once around her neck. It smelled faintly of cedar and cold air. By the time she finished the 6th page, the pattern was complete enough to survive hostile reading. Vale sanded the last line, stacked the sheets, and slid them into oilskin. "These go nowhere unguarded," he said. Harrow extended his bandaged hand. Vale hesitated, then passed him the packet. Harrow held it a moment, looking at the cramped figures, then offered it to Victoria instead. "Carry this," he said. She stared. "My lord, if we are stopped, they will search me first for weapons and papers. They will search you for none." His gaze did not soften. "Hide it where you hid the letters." She slid the packet beneath her torn cuff seam, deeper this time against skin. The edge scratched her wrist. Outside, men shouted over harness rings and stamping horses. The innkeeper appeared at the door, breath clouding. My lord, team is ready. Drift on the upper lane is shoulder high. Lower road may still pass. Harrow looked to Victoria. Can you mount? Yes. Can you remain upright in crosswind? Yes, Vale said. Miss Murphy, once we leave, there is no safe return until this is finished. Victoria rose, Harrow's scarf at her throat, her own shawl around a stable boy's leg, ink drying on her hands like proof. It has been unfinished for years, sir. For the first time, Harrow's mouth shifted at one corner, brief and severe. Not quite a smile. He stepped aside and held the door open to the storm. Then we end it today. And he led her straight into the white roar beyond the inn door. Wind struck like a wall. It shoved sleet under her lashes and stole breath at once. The yard had narrowed to lantern halos and moving shadows. Horses stamped in harness, flanks steaming, leather traces creaking as grooms fought buckles gone stiff with ice. Vale swung into the lead saddle. 2 hired men took the rear with cloaks wrapped to the eyes. Harrow reached for Victoria's elbow only when she put her left foot to the stirrup and the cut at her heel failed her. Pain shot up her leg so sharply she tasted copper again. She did not cry out. She caught the saddle horn, jaw tight, and tried once more. "Stop!" he said. "I can mount. You can fall. I have ridden in worse weather. You have bled through your stocking for 6 miles. His hand stayed at her elbow, steady, unyielding, not possessive, not gentle either. Pure function. She hated that her body leaned into that steadiness for one instant before she corrected. A groom knelt and cupped his hands for her boot. She used his lift, ignored the fire at her heel, and settled side saddle on the bay mare with her spine straight and her hands closed hard on the reins. Harrow watched the set of her mouth as if committing it to memory. Then he mounted his own horse with his bandaged hand held close to his chest and gave a short nod to Vale. They moved out in a staggered line, heads down against the storm, chains on the coach wheels behind them grinding through packed drift. The inn vanished in less than 20 yards. Road and field merged into one pale violence, the hedges only darker blurs where snow gathered in ridges. Victoria kept count to hold panic off. 12 hoofbeats to the turn, 16 to the ditch crossing. The packet under her cuff scraped her wrist each time her mare jolted through ruts. Harrow rode half a length to her right, close enough that his horse's shoulder broke wind for hers, far enough that no one could call it impropriety if they lived to report it. By the time they cleared the old mill marker, dawn had risen into a flat white light with no sun in it, and her right hand had gone numb around the reins. The mare stumbled once at a buried stone. Victoria's vision flashed black at the edges. She corrected seat and balance, but the second stumble came quicker, and this time she swayed too far. Harrow's horse slammed in toward hers with brutal precision, closing the gap before she slid. His good hand caught her forearm, iron grip through wet wool. He did not release until she was upright again. "You are done on that saddle," he said. "I am not." "You are shaking so hard you cannot hold line." "I can!" He leaned across, grey eyes cutting over her face, her shoulders, the way her teeth had begun to strike together in spite of pride. "You gave away your only dry shawl. Your dress is still wet at the spine. Your left heel opens each time you put weight down. You have eaten broth and half a crust in 2 days. Do not insult me with another lie." The words hit with the same force as sleet. No one had ever listed her pain without contempt. No one had ever counted it as if it mattered. She stared at him, breath ragged behind her scarf. Vale looked back once through driving snow, saw the line halt, and turned his face away with tact that felt almost courtly in that wasteland. "I can still ride," she said, quieter now. "For another quarter-mile, perhaps." Harrow's jaw tightened against a pulse of pain from his injured hand. She saw colour soak fresh through linen at the centre of his bandage. "Then I will carry you unconscious, and we will lose the road." "I will not be carried." "Good. Then you will transfer." He dismounted before argument could gather shape, boots sinking to mid-calf in drift, and came to her mare's side. He held out his arm. Snow crusted his lashes. Blood marked his cuff. The wind tore at his coat skirts, and he stood as if stone had been set in the road. "Now," he said. Her first instinct was refusal. Her second was calculation. If she fell, the packet might be lost in snow, and all of this would end under a hedge with no witness but crows. She swung her leg clear with clumsy haste, teeth set, and slid down into his waiting arm. Pain flared at heel and ankle. The world tipped. He took her weight without visible strain and turned her toward his horse. There was no graceful way. He lifted her at the waist with his uninjured arm and placed her before his saddle, not behind, one knee braced against the pommel to keep her from sliding sideways. She froze. "My lord, this is survival." He mounted behind her in one controlled motion, gathered both reins in his good hand, and settled his injured hand against his chest to protect it from jarring. His body formed a wall at her back, heat and damp wool and controlled breathing. "Sit forward. Keep your shoulders low." The command disguised the care. She heard it anyway. They rode. From that height the storm looked even less human. Snow ran sideways in long white sheets. Tree lines appeared and vanished. Twice Vale dismounted to probe the road edge with a pole before signalling safe passage. At the lower bridge the drift had climbed the rail and swallowed half the span. Water thundered unseen below, black and swollen from thaw under ice. Horses balked. One rear man cursed under his breath and crossed himself. Harrow's voice cut through the wind. "Single file, no stopping on timber." His chest barely moved against her back. Every shift of the horse pulled at the cut in his palm. She felt him absorb the shock in his shoulders rather than his hand. She felt, too, that he kept the horse's pace matched to her breathing once he sensed how cold had shortened it. 4 strides exhale, 4 inhale. It was so precise it unsettled her more than kindness would have. At mid-bridge, a gust slammed into them broadside. The horse lurched. Victoria grabbed at the mane. Harrow's arm came across her ribs and locked there, hard as an iron bar. "Do not look down," he said by her ear. "I was not going to." "You were." The horse found footing. Planks rang under iron. Then they were across, plunging into deeper drifts beyond the far hedge, where the lane bent toward bracken lands. Another half-mile and Vale raised a fist. Ahead, a wagon sat, jackknifed in the road, one wheel sunk to axle, driver and 2 farm men straining uselessly at frozen spokes. A woman huddled under the tilted bed with a child wrapped in sacking. The child coughed that same tearing cough Victoria had heard at the inn. Harrow drew rein at once. "We lose time," Vale called. "We lose people if we pass," Victoria answered before she could stop herself. Harrow did not rebuke her. He looked once at the wagon, once at the white sky, measured the distance yet to Bracken House, then spoke. 2 minutes. Ropes." Men moved. Vale swore softly but dismounted with the rest. Harrow slid down and steadied Victoria as she followed, ignoring his own hand entirely while she nearly buckled on landing. He got her to the lee side of the wagon, out of direct wind, and only then turned to the trapped wheel. She went to the woman and child. The boy's chest rattled with each breath, lips dry, eyes wide with the exhausted fear of long cold. Victoria pulled the cedar-scented scarf from her own neck and wrapped it around him over the sacking, tucking wool close at the throat. She showed the mother how to cup her gloved hands and breathe warm air into the scarf fold between coughs. "Keep him upright," she said. "Do not lay him flat while he is this tight." The woman nodded frantically. "Bless you, miss!" Ropes snapped taut. Men heaved. The wagon lurched free with a groan of frozen wood. Harrow gave the driver 3 clipped instructions on the nearest chapel outbuilding where a stove might still be lit, then pressed coins into the man's palm without ceremony and turned back to Victoria. She had not realized how violently she was trembling until he took her shoulders and held her still. "Enough," he said. "It was 1 minute. It was your last dry layer." He needed it more. He did. There was no censure in it, only fact. He looked down at her bare throat, where wind had already raised her skin in gooseflesh, and stripped his heavy outer gloves with his teeth, because one hand could not manage the wet leather. He thrust the gloves at her. She stared. "You need these." "I have circulation. You have none." "My lord, take them." She took them because her fingers had gone white at the tips. They were too large, lined in wool, still warm, from his hands. He watched until she forced her stiff fingers fully in, then stepped back and signalled the column forward again. When he mounted this time, he did not ask. He lifted her ahead of him as before and set her secure, his arm a brace across her middle, until the horse found rhythm. They rode in silence for long minutes, wind and hoofbeats and the creak of wet tack their only speech. Her head dipped once, with fatigue. He adjusted, drawing her fractionally back against him to keep her centred. She felt the careful restraint in every movement. He did not crowd. He did not retreat. At last she spoke into the storm. "Why are you doing this?" No answer came at once. She heard only the horse's breath and the scrape of ice under shoe. She thought he would leave it unanswered, as powerful men did when questions came from women with no title. Then his voice, low and flat with effort. "Because I watched you in that kitchen and understood 3 things." She waited. "You were starving and fed a child." Snow rattled off his coat collar and into her hair. "You were shaking and gave your shawl to a boy who could not repay you." His grip on the reins shifted. Pain crossed his breathing. Still he continued. "You had every reason to save yourself first and did not." The horse plunged through a drift nearly to the knee. He held them steady with brutal control from one good hand. "I have seen titled men do less with full bellies and warm fires," he said. "I will not stand aside while they call you unfit." Her throat tightened around words she could not choose. Praise had always come barbed in her life, tied to obedience or silence. This had neither. It landed clean and therefore cut deeper. "You do not know me," she managed. "I know enough." His mouth was near her temple now, voice almost lost to wind. "I know you carry proof against people who have hurt you. I know you still stop for strangers. I know you're cold to the bone and still counting figures." She closed her eyes for one breath against the sting. He spoke again, and this time the line was not command, not strategy, not even argument. It was a verdict. "From this mile forward, no one reaches you without passing through me." The words could not be recalled once spoken. She felt that as surely as she felt his heartbeat through soaked wool at her back. The road did not pause for it. The storm did not soften. Yet, inside her, some old architecture of endurance shifted under new weight and did not collapse. Ahead, Vale raised his arm and pointed through the blowing white. Dark mass emerged by degrees. Yew trees bent under snow, boundary wall half buried, the iron crest of Brackenhouse gates rimed in ice. Beyond them, the house itself loomed grey and vast, chimneys smoking, windows bright with the very coal paid for by stolen rents. In the forecourt, shapes moved, tenants gathered in cloaks and caps. 2 footmen in bracken livery stood at the steps. A carriage with the magistrate's crest rocked in the wind beside the portico. Harrow brought the horse to a halt just outside the gate and did not dismount at once. He stayed very still behind her, as if giving her one final beat before impact. Snow settled on his shoulders and did not melt quickly now. "Listen to me," he said. She nodded. "You speak only what you can swear." "Yes." "You do not answer insult." "Yes." "You do not step away from my side unless I order it." She turned her head enough to meet his eyes over her shoulder. Winter grey, exhausted, absolute. "I told you already, my lord." "I will stand beside you, not beneath you." A brief pause. Then that same severe shift at one corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "Beside me, then," he said, and lifted her down into the snow. Snow closed over her boots at once, crust breaking around the leather, and the pain in her heel flared bright enough to bend her knees. Harrow's hand caught her forearm before she tipped. He did not release her until Vale had opened the gate and the small party moved into the forecourt where tenants stood in a ragged line under sleet-dark cloaks, caps in hand, faces pinched by cold and dread. They looked first at the Earl, then at Victoria, then at the front steps where Lady Bracken waited in plum silk with a fur mantle and no hat, as if weather itself were a servant expected to step aside. The rustle of her skirts carried even through wind. So did the scent of rosewater. "You return with theatrical escort," Lady Bracken called, voice pitched for the tenants as much as for the men on horseback. "How industrious! I had thought you had run off with my papers." Victoria walked forward beside Harrow, each step measured. "Your papers were delivered to Mr. Pell at dawn. I have receipt." Lady Bracken's smile thinned. "You have nothing that concerns this assembly. You were instructed to present yourself in Mariston." "I was instructed," Victoria said, "to sign away land you had no right to transfer." The elder stepdaughter, wrapped in blue velvet at the door, gave a brittle laugh. "She has found a patron and suddenly speaks law." "Silence," Harrow said, and the words struck the stones like a dropped blade. Lady Bracken descended one step, then another, silk lifted from slush by gloved fingers. "My lord, this is a domestic matter. The girl is overwrought, half frozen, and habitually confused by numbers. I am sure your concern is charitable. It is also misplaced." Harrow did not look at her. "Magistrate." A carriage door opened under the portico. Magistrate Ellery stepped down, cloak buttoned to his throat, 2 constables at his back. He held a packet under oilskin and spoke without ceremony. "Lady Bracken, I attend on sworn petition regarding fraudulent diversion of estate rents, falsification of arrears, coercive transfer attempt, and unlawful deprivation of majority rights from Miss Victoria Murphy." A murmur moved through the tenants like wind through dry reeds. Lady Bracken's face changed, not to fear, not yet, but to calculation sharpened to a point. She turned on Victoria so quickly the movement looked like grace until the glove cracked across Victoria's cheek. The sound was small. It carried everywhere. Harrow stepped between them in one motion, shoulders squared, voice low enough that everyone had to strain to hear it. "Do not touch her again." Lady Bracken drew back as if struck herself. "How dare—" "Constable," Ellery said, "remain at Lady Bracken's side." Victoria's face burned. She did not lift a hand to it. She reached instead for the torn seam at her cuff, pulled free Mr. Pell's receipt and Lady Bracken's signed order barring her return, and handed both to the magistrate. Ellery read, brows tightening at the second page. "You ordered her exclusion from residence before execution of transfer," he said, and required signature by dawn. A household correction, Lady Bracken snapped. Nothing more. A correction does not void legal occupancy, Ellery replied, nor does it authorise coercion. Vale came forward with the oilskin packet of Victoria's reconstructed columns. Prepared this morning from memory, your worship against known ledgers and prior carrier logs. Lady Bracken made a short, contemptuous sound. Memory? From that girl? Victoria met her eyes. From the girl who balanced your books while you told guests she could not count. Ellery extended his hand. Miss Murphy, if you can identify primary records on site, we proceed now. I can. She turned toward the house she had been denied. Morning room escritoire, false bottom, right drawer. Pantry strongbox behind flower chest. Attic floorboard, third from bed leg by eave wall. Lady Bracken's composure cracked for the first time. You have been in my rooms? In my father's house, Victoria said. By late morning the storm still drove against windows, but the evidence lay in ordered stacks on the long dining table under magistrates' lamps. The pantry strongbox yielded rent rolls and duplicate receipts. The morning room drawer held the petition draft naming Victoria unfit. The attic board yielded Victoria's hidden copy pages, edges curled, ink cramped and exact. Ellery compared line to line while a bank clerk from Mariston, summoned by Vale on the road, produced stamped receipts that matched Victoria's missing sums to withdrawals deposited under Lady Bracken's personal account code. No one spoke when the pattern finished revealing itself. Even the stepdaughters stopped whispering. Ellery set down his pen. Lady Bracken, these instruments established diversion, fabrication, and attempted unlawful transfer. I am issuing seizure orders pending Crown review. You are removed from financial authority over Bracken lands with immediate effect. One constable held out a ledger for her keys. Lady Bracken stood rigid, then unclasped the chain from her waist and dropped ring after ring onto the table. Pantry, cellar, strong room, east gate, deed chest. Metal struck wood like hard rain. Your trunks, Ellery continued, will be sealed until inventory. You will remain in the West Guest Suite, under supervision. The elder daughter took one step forward. You cannot confine us like criminals. Ellery's expression did not alter. Then do not behave like criminals. Harrow had not moved from the wall near the hearth. Snowmelt darkened the hem of his coat. His bandage had bled through again. Victoria saw it only when he reached to steady a wavering stack of books, and his fingers left a pale red imprint on linen. Your hand, she said quietly. It can wait. It has waited since Mariston. He looked at her for a long moment, then gave one short nod and allowed the kitchen woman to rebind it at the sideboard while proceedings continued. He did not flinch. He did not look away from Victoria while the linen tightened. By the time the church bell marked 2, the tenants had been called in by name to hear the magistrate's interim ruling in plain language. Rents suspended for 2 weeks pending correction, no evictions, repairs to proceed from recovered funds, all future payments receipted under Miss Murphy's authority, faces that had come set for another humiliation altered by degrees into wary relief. When the last tenant left, Mrs. Doyle appeared at the doorway of the old servants' hall, older and thinner than Victoria remembered, bonnet damp from storm. She had returned at Vale's request to witness inventory because she knew the house's original books. Her eyes went to Victoria's cheek, still marked, then to the table of ledgers. I told your father you had his head for figures, she said. Victoria swallowed. Will you come back if I ask? Mrs. Doyle's mouth trembled once and steadied. For fair wage and honest books, miss, I will come back before supper. Then before supper, Victoria said. The stable yard lamps were being lit when Ned arrived on crutches, scarf still knotted around his shin, cap in both hands. He hovered near the door until Victoria saw him. "Mr. Cole says I am no use for harness this week," he blurted, fear and hope tangled together. "I thought I was turned out." Vale stepped from the shadow beside the archway and handed him a folded paper with 2 seals. "You are apprenticed to Master Fenn at Harrow Forge, beginning Monday, board included. Fees paid for, first year." "Attendance conditional on literacy lessons twice weekly," Miss Murphy insisted. Ned stared at the page as if it might vanish. "I cannot pay this back." Victoria touched the horseshoe nail still pinned to his cap band. "You can. Learn well, work clean, do not lie about your sums." He nodded so hard the crutch slipped, and Harrow, nearest him, caught both boy and wood in one efficient movement before either struck stone. Ned flushed the ears. Harrow set him upright and said only, "Stand straight! A farrier does not bend to panic." Night settled heavy and blue against the windows before the last seal was stamped over Lady Bracken's trunks. In the former morning salon, where silk chairs still crowded the hearth that had once warmed law books, Victoria stood alone for the first time that day and pressed her palm to the mantel until the tremor left her fingers. The room smelled of wax, wet wool, and faint rosewater fading under coal smoke. Behind her, quiet boots crossed the threshold. Harrow stopped 2 paces away. "Ellery is done. Vale has posted guards at the deed chest and lower gate." She turned. He had removed his coat. Fatigue carved deeper lines around his mouth, and the fresh bandage on his palm was clean at last. "Then it is finished." "The seizure is finished." His gaze held hers. "The repair begins tomorrow." She nodded. "I know." For a moment neither spoke. Storm tapped the panes in softer intervals now, as if spent. He reached into his inner pocket and drew out a narrow object wrapped in oilcloth. Victoria recognised it before he unfolded it. Her father's fountain pen, the one sold from the library years ago, its silver clip dented near the cap. "I found it in a dealer's lot in York last year," he said. "I bought it because the initials were Murphy and no one else bid." She took it with both hands. The metal was cold. "Why did you keep it?" "I did not know to whom it belonged." A pause. "I do now." Tears burned, sudden and fierce. She wiped them at once with the back of Harrow's borrowed glove, and gave the glove back to him in the same motion. He accepted it without comment, then took off the second glove and set both on the mantel between them, as if marking an end to one kind of distance. "I came because you would not ask," he said, voice roughened by a weariness he no longer hid, "and because you should never have stood alone." She met his gaze and let him see the answer before she spoke it. "I will stand beside you, Reese, never beneath you." His mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, entirely real. "Beside me is all I have wanted." On the first clear morning after the storm, in the estate chapel with Mrs. Doyle and Vale as witnesses and Magistrate Ellery signing the register, Victoria Murphy entered Bracken House, again under her own name and authority. Before noon she posted wages in the servants' hall, restored dismissed staff where she could, and had the old library unlocked and measured for shelves. At vespers, when Harrow called formally with gloves on and voice steady, she received him in that same room among unpacked ledgers and returned books, heard his plain proposal for a courtship without debt or coercion, and gave her plain assent. In June, beneath the East Meadow pear tree that had bloomed late as ever, she married him by choice, signed the register with her father's pen, and kept her own name on the estate books beside his title, line by line, exactly balanced.